Well, let me start just by, as Schengen mentioned, I've actually been, for at least the ag portion of the G20 talks over the last couple of years, have been acting as the so-called Sous Sherpa. And for those of you who like the analogy, Sous Sherpas are one step above the yaks. So I don't know if I'm just a super yak or a Sous Sherpa, but in any event, it's been an interesting time over the last several years, and without, I'm going to try to move quickly through this. Just the background, I mean, everyone knows sort of why the French presidency last year decided to put a focus on agricultural price volatility, both because of, one, increasing prices. You can see the turn up in prices that we've seen over the last 5 years or so, and indeed that have continued today, and also the increased price volatility that we saw, particularly 2007, 2008, but again, in this chart stops at the end of 2010. Again, it renewed volatility in many markets over the last year as stocks, particularly for feed grains, have been very, very, very tight. Was mentioned the action plan from last year, and I think that one of the important things that came out of that was the creation of this AMIS system and the Rapid Response Forum. Those I think were two of the key deliverables out of this. There are other things that were mentioned. We have a geomonitoring initiative that ties together a lot of the work that people like USDA and others have been doing in terms of satellite monitoring, mapping vegetation indices to yields, and doing a little better job, of trying to estimate yields. And then also on the research side, two major things: this wheat initiative that the French put forward, and then also this tropical ag platform. And then as Schengen mentioned, a platform for ag risk management with the hopes of developing a set of risk management tools. Well, I think one of the other things that came out of last year's action plan was, and I think all the G20 members at least were in agreement on this aspect, is that the real, over the long term, the real answer was increasing productivity. And this chart just shows you, the work that was done by the FAO a couple of years back, where it was looked, where world food needs were estimated out to 2050, and it was, was estimated that world production would have to increase by 70-some-odd%. I think for developing countries, a doubling by 2050. And you can see from at least this analysis that was done by one of the FAO authors that most of that is going to have to come from productivity increases in terms of yields. That is very little arable land, and in some places arable land actually declining. And so while there is some increases from cropping intensity, most will come from yield increases, which then gets, again, the focus then is put on increasing yields. This just shows, for those of you who follow U.S. productivity measures, and I know IFPRI has done a lot of work in this area, just shows total factor productivity for the U.S. And you can see that output over the last several 50-some-odd, 60-some-odd years has increased by 2.5 times that of what it was in the early 50s, while input use remaining roughly the same. So your factor productivity, increasing dramatically over that period. Looking at our what we spend on research in terms of both public and private, at least in real terms here, as deflating for inflation, you can see that at least in the U.S. public research spending has been rather flat. In fact, declining a little bit over the last couple of years. I think this year's budget would remain roughly, has a slight increase in it, but again, the issue is it's not increasing like it was, say 20 to 30 years ago. And the good news, on the other hand, is that we have seen some increase in big boost in private R&D, and at least in recent years, private R&D spending exceeding that of public R&D. The importance of this, though, is in terms of what does this mean for future productivity. ERS did some analysis, and I know other authors other researchers like Julian Austin and Phil Pardee and others have done work in this area. And I think I think they do come to fairly common or similar conclusions. That is, holding research dollars, at least in constant nominal dollars, actually productivity growth really begins to flatten. And I think that this chart, at least this analysis that was done by Paul Heisey at ERS with Keith Fugely and I think show that at least in looking at research and development terms, that you don't get the sort of 70% increase, at least this is for the US alone, but you don't get that sort of increase unless you're actually increasing on the order of 1% per year in real terms. And so that's a big challenge, and I think that's certainly something G20 countries are grappling with, but I think the other major thing is how do you, all these, U.S. obviously isn't the only country that's spending research dollars. Is there a way of actually getting better efficiencies and coordination across countries? The U.S. is at least proposing, and I know Massimo is going to go over some of the I/O report, and there's some, I think, a lot of support for the idea of having some coordinating group of chief scientists, if you will, for the G20. And the G20, if you're looking at the G20, that's where the most major, or the bulk of the research dollars are in those countries. And the idea of this group would be to meet periodically, not really talking about creating a new organization or a new secretariat, but would work within either some existing mechanism. I think that's hopefully that could be looked at this fall and decided whether that should be GCARD or the CG system or Tropical Ad Platform or the Global Research Alliance. All of these have research components to them, obviously. But the G20 members, of course, their research goes beyond just developing countries or just beyond climate change research. And the idea would be have a meeting of these chief scientists periodically, maybe once every 2 years, to identify global research priorities and targets to facilitate research collaboration by both public and private entities. And then I think also very important to track progress on established research goals. I mean, this is almost a no-brainer, I think, in one sense, but I think there's a lot of benefits of getting these groups together. I think there's a whole number of things that could be looked at. We talk about getting some sort of common platform where we'd have open access to scholarly publications and other technical documentation, open access to germplasm collections. I mean, efforts are underway, as many of you know, for each one of these. Certainly the U.S. has a number of these initiatives, other countries as well, and a lot of the international organizations. But again, open access to germplasm, open access to genomic and genetic data, improving agricultural innovation systems, and I think lastly, also very important is improving agricultural statistics. Again, a number of initiatives here, and the hope would be that these chief scientists would be able to meet on this and again, collaborate efforts in terms of to improve these. And with that, let me stop and turn it over to Maximo.
Well, thank you, Joe.
Ray.